Tapatha Brahmana, and it clearly identifies that soma was made from sana, which is the old Sanskrit word for cannabis. So although it's become popularized by the work of R. Gordon Wasson, a banker writing in the 70s, that soma was the fly agaric mushrooms, this, if you take a good look at the Vedas and other literature from the time period, it just doesn't hold any water. Wasson suggested that Vedic references to the drinking of urine indicated the fly agaric mushroom because the active chemicals of the fly agaric could be passed through the urine and re-ingested. But when you take a look at the Vedas, there is no references to drinking urine. It's all just Wasson's madcap interpretation of text. What they do talk about is the devotees drinking soma on earth, and then their counterparts in heaven drinking the heavenly soma, and then pissing. But what they're doing is pissing back the rain, which watered the soma. So it's pretty clear from the Vedic references that there wasn't any ingestion of the said urine that Wasson pointed to. And you know, we're talking about like the Hindu religion is basically the religion of millions of people. And eventually, in later times, there became prohibitions around the use of cannabis and a variety of intoxicants. This initiated with the rise of Buddhism, which was the ultimate sober religion. Buddha was a member of an Aryan caste that was prohibited from taking the soma drink that was used by his other Aryan counterparts. And he instilled a number of prohibitions against alcohol. Like if you don't drink alcohol in Hinduism, it's derived actually from Buddhism, because in the early Vedic religion, alcohol was really very prevalent and popularly used. And if you don't eat meat in Hinduism, that's also derived from Buddhism. All these things were influenced from the Buddha around 500, 600 BC.
Which Buddha?
Well, the initial Buddha, I guess, the Indian Buddha, the Prince Gautama.
Siddhartha.
Yeah, Siddhartha. And this didn't really take hold in the. And also, it should be pointed out that from about 300 or 400 BC up until about the 10th century AD, Buddhism was the national religion of India. Hinduism, as we see it now, was a re-emergence of the old Vedic religion from 1,200 years before, and so a lot of information was lost during that intervening 1,200 years, where it was kind of pushed to the sidelines. But Buddhist prohibitions against cannabis didn't really hold. And then along came another book, the Book of Manu, which had much stricter prohibitions and prohibited the right of consecrating cannabis as soma. And this is where we see a number of other plants come into play, substitutions for the agent soma. In fact, the first substitution was the Bodhi tree, the same type of tree that Buddha sat under, indicating that that's where the initial prohibitions came from. And a lot of the in its unconsecrated form, cannabis was referred to as sana or bang. And it was through a Brahmanic consecration that it became this beverage, soma. So it was imbued with religious intent during its consecration. And all that took place was the stopping of this consecration of cannabis. Cannabis continued to be used under the name bhang, and its intent and rites that were associated with it became associated with the Lord known as Shiva, the popular god, Indian god of today, Shiva. But that didn't happen until around 300 BC, that Shiva became associated with cannabis under its unconsecrated name of bhang. And a number of substitutions came into the Hindu religion under the name soma. That still happens today. Now they use milkweed and other plants as soma in India. But the origins of it, we know from the Aryan ancestors that brought the religion into India and ancient texts was in fact cannabis. Similar thing happened in the Persian religion with the drink called hayoma, where it was prohibited because it became associated with orgiastic rites. And then the mild stimulating plant, ephedra, was used in its place. And on the Zoroastrian thing, what we have now is this new archaeological evidence from the Bactria Margiana region near Afghanistan of this massive temple about the size of a football field that was discovered. And half of the temple was dedicated to making the sacred beverage, the hayoma. And it was a preparation then of cannabis and ephedra. So ephedra is the source of ephedrine, which is the source of a number of methamphetamine-type products. So it's a very powerful stimulant, and it would have been mixed with cannabis and consumed on the premises and also cannabis was dried there and prepared for foreign destinations. It was a major depot in the ancient world of cannabis trade and spread culture throughout the ancient world. And it's important to remember, like, the role of Persia isn't so great in today's world, but in the ancient world, much of the ancient world was ruled by Persia, all through the Middle East and India, and even areas of Europe were under Persian rule in the ancient world. And Persian religion had a tremendous effect on the development of monotheistic Judaism, the worship of one God being monotheism. Zoroastrianism, when they went through their reforms regarding the Hayoma, went through a massive change of religion as well, much like happened in India. But this was a monotheistic reform by one of their prophets known as Zoroaster. And Zoroaster was uptight because what was happening were people were having these nocturnal rituals with orgiastic rites, animal sacrifices, and mass consumption of this drink, Hayoma, which was a preparation of cannabis and ephedra. And he was taken quite aback by this, much like Moses was by the paganistic rites of the Hebrews and stuff. And he took the religion through a number of reforms, which included getting rid of their whole pantheon of a variety of deities. The religion at the time was much like Hinduism today, where there's all sorts of gods and goddesses governing different areas of life. And he put them all under the rule of one god, Ahura Mazda. And then had an opponent to Ahura Mazda, Angru Manu, who was much like the Christian devil. And prior to this time, prior to the time of Zoroaster's reforms, there's little evidence that there was any sort of like monotheistic counterpart of this religion in Judaism. And what happened is Israel and Judah, even in the Old Testament, if you read the Book of Kings and the Book of Chronicles, throughout much of the kingdom period, it's all polytheistic, and that's what the prophets are rallying against, and the different reforming kings are rallying against, is the paganistic, orgiastic activities of the people, and trying to instill this monotheistic culture of strict reforms. And what happened is Israel and Judah fell first by the Assyrians, Babylonians, and then they were spread out throughout the ancient world. It was a common habit to take the ruling class of an area when you conquered them and put them into a new area so they wouldn't have people to govern, and then leave the lower class people there without any sort of ruling class to direct them. And this happened. But then what happened was when the Persians took over the ancient world and conquered the Assyrians, Babylonians, and took rule of the ancient world, they put these different people back into their homelands. And part of what the Persian situation was, you could go back and you could worship one of your deities as the main deity. And there's a lot of evidence pointing to that. What happened with the Hebrew religion was it was more like a polytheistic Canaanite religion, and then after the Persians it became monotheistic. And this was done so that all of the money, the temple tithes and whatnot would go back to the temple, and it would kind of create a focus for revenue and also a focus for governing, because religious parties are much like political parties in the ancient world. And it's interesting because the whole of the Zoroastrian religion, although Zoroaster initiated these prohibitions of Hayoma, we know from Zoroastrian references that he used cannabis himself under the names of Banga and Man for enlightening purposes for himself, but also for the initiation of others. And in fact, his religion wasn't accepted as a national religion in the ancient world until he convinced the king, known by the name of Vishtaspa, of the worthiness of his religion by serving him a drink of bhang. And then awaking from his trance, he accepted Zoroaster's religion wholeheartedly. And this same Vishtaspa was the father of a well-known Persian figure known as Darius. And Darius is the king that put all the Hebrews back into the area of the world. And he had in his kingdom a Jewish scribe by the name of Ezra, who plays a major part as a prophet in the Old Testament. And in the book of Esdras, which is in the Apocrypha, which is as old as the Old Testament material, but just wasn't included in the official canon, partially because there's indications of Ezra partaking of a psychoactive beverage. Ezra quite clearly describes drinking of a cup of fire, and then after drinking of the cup of the fire, having this whole inspiration come over him to recast and rewrite the whole of Jewish scripture. In fact, many people attribute the Old Testament to Ezra and say before that it was a few fragmented and unconnected books. And the Book of Chronicles is thought to be written by Ezra. The Genesis accounts are all thought to be written by Ezra. And he put all this together after drinking basically a cup of this cannabis beverage.